Hello, folks. It's George Leoniak, and welcome to New Geometry. Today, I'm excited to be bringing you a video more on the Krystal Spiral, and particularly this video is going to be emphasis is going to be on the 12 Tree of Life, the Kathara Grid, and we're going to take a look at that in comparison to some other Tree of Life designs that are out there, and really get down to try and understand what is the Kathara Grid unit in a structural geometric form. All right, so let me go ahead and share the screen and walk through this presentation that I've set up. Okay, so I have a few videos out there on this topic. This is probably from about maybe 3 years ago. Just took a few slides from this video here. Trying my early understanding of the 3D geometry of the Kathara Grid was very much based on the cube and a portion of the octahedron, rhombic dodecahedron, which is the compound of the cube and the octahedron. And back then, I was still intrigued by figuring out how the spiral will move in a three-dimensional way, like I've been sharing in my recent videos, through a kind of cone-like structure as it works its way down the spiral. This is very much related to the structure and geometry of the light body. And throughout this presentation, we're going to get more into discussing some more of the Merkaba symmetry or geometry, either based on a kind of octahedral view or a tetrahedral view. So stay tuned for that. But some of my earlier studies were looking at really showing that if we rotate this structure to this view from a hexagonal point of view, that the geometry contains and points basically just rotate from a square orientation to a hexagonal orientation. Now, recently I wanted to go back and to look at some of the Kathara manual material and just kind of try and get a sense a little more about what the structure or the base unit is here of this Kathara Grid structure, particularly this shape right here that I'm outlining in the bottom right. And you can see it here, it's kind of plugging into the base of this structure. Interestingly, that the Merkaba, star tetrahedron Merkaba, is very much a part of the Keylontic science, and that was a kind of more and more of a surprise to me, considering how much hexagonal geometry, particularly based on the flower of life pattern, isn't really part of their teachings very much at all and frowned upon greatly. But as you can see that the Kathara unit here is overlaid a star tetrahedron, and it's essential to what the Merkaba is still based on two tetrahedra, a cube, hexagons, etc. So when I'm looking at this diagram here, we're going to discuss this form here in just a little bit too of what's going on there. So when I saw this, I was quite excited about this because recently when I was studying more about this shape and really looking at it from different perspectives, I saw, and I think it was maybe documented in a previous video, I'm not sure, but the same outline, if we look at this shape and rotate it to a flat shape, would be the proportions of a hexagon. So the origin of the Krystal Spiral, as I've been saying, is at the center of an octahedron or a cubeoctahedron or at a cube in structural geometry. And that this particular view that's being shared is really can be viewed as a tilted hexagon that's drawn in a square view perspective. Now I'm going to show you some geometry of how that shape can be considered that. So here is the Kathara Grid unit that is popularized within the Keylontic science as the 12 Tree of Life. Now it's 12 Tree of Life, it's called because of the 12 vertices, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now, this right here, this gray bit of triangle that's sticking up on the top and bottom here is really a cube octahedron triangles that if I tilt the form with the cube octahedron, which I have one, I'll use this one. So if I have a cubeoctahedron, and I'm going to rotate it through a couple views. So this would be the view that you're looking at it in. And you have a triangle to the right, a triangle to the left, triangle up and down. But if I tilt it just a little bit more, you'll see that you have a triangle facing you right at the center. So that's all that is really happening there. And as you do that, of course, that hexagonal plane that is on the inside of the form, now that's part of the plane through the cubeoctahedron, and it's still tilted there because a flat cubeoctahedron from top-down view would just be what you see here, a flat hexagon, and we've slightly tilted it here. But in this view, we also have in the hexagon orientation, you see right in the flower of life, we have the same tilted hexagon, and of course, you can connect the same 12 tree of life, and really what I started to perceive this cubeoctahedron, perceive this shape as, is really a plane, a flat plane within the structure of a cubeoctahedron and basically a hexagon. So that's going to be very counter to many of the teachings of the Kathara, but I'm going to illustrate how that it's quite possible and appears to be very strongly correlated to the imagery shown in the Keylontic science manuals. So here's the diagram that I showed you previously, taken from one of the manuals, and I figured out how to reconstruct that in the square view orientation. As you can see, here's a central square, and here are the other 2 points expanding it out to that 12th tree of life. Now, from when I look at this diagram here, what I see is I am very curious about what the dotted lines were about. Here, 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 and here, and through the center. The square itself is not dotted like I did over here. So this is the curious part, but all these dotted lines, they make sense within looking at this as a hexagonal pyramid, all right? So we can look at it as basically a pyramid with a hexagon base. I think I have one of those somewhere around here. Well, picture a little hexagonal pyramid that is got a hexagon base, and it's tilted away from you at this point. Oh, here, I got this little one here. So here's your hexagon base pyramid. If I tilt it just a little bit, you'll see that we have a hexagon. So if I tilt it just right, and we could see through the form, we would see that this could be a base hexagon slightly tilted. And that's what this pyramid structure looks like, because I didn't see any other reason why to kind of show this translucent dotted lines. Now, my theory is why this square is not dotted. It's probably the original drawing was done starting off with drawing a regular square and then kind of constructing the rest of the diagram on top of it. But for the most part, this, and I'll show now how this also fits into the geometry of the form that I'll show you later, that also supports that this is really being viewed as a hexagon plane and being projecting out towards a pinnacle that you'll see is going to relate to a cube vertex in just a moment. All right, so that's straight from the manual, and my interpretation of it as a hexagon plane. Now, a few videos ago, I think some of that information may have got cut out of the video, one of the videos, but I'll go over it again here. I started to come up with this kind of conclusion on my own as I was studying the doubling sequence cone and spiral, which we'll come to in a little bit. But my recent videos have been talking about a cone that is in a square base or a hexagon base pyramid that supports the doubling sequence spiral cone, which I feel, which does outline the Kathara Grid Krystal Spiral as it works its way around. So more images on that soon. But right here is that same shape, basically one nested inside another. It's a smaller one, but then I can follow it down towards the center point of the diagram. And this will be based on 6 sides. And here it is looking at it from a side view, and this is the proportions, and this is the angle that the base of the pyramid is, which is the 75 to 8, which means we could stack circles or spheres within inside this pyramid, and they'll touch the faces, and they'll all be doubling in their sequence, decreasing in size by doubling sequence as they go towards that 0 point. Now, when I first saw this, I took this diagram here and put it and basically set up the base to be the same size as this one, because I wanted to see if there was a connection between the height of the doubling sequence pyramid that I came up with in the truncated octahedron. That form previously was the truncated octahedron, which is this form here. So it's an octahedron which has hexagon faces and square faces, and we're looking at a hexagon half the size on that hexagon face, and then that will go into the center of the diagram following the doubling sequence of the spiral. Okay, so they're not the same size, so I was really then curious to figure out, well, what is the height of that? And it doesn't actually fit into some sort of proportion and structure in geometry, or was it just arbitrarily picked as an endpoint to show something that it looks more like a pyramid coming off of a hexagon, and we'll just stop it anywhere? Well, if it is lawful, as Frank Chester uses the word, then it should probably have some internal integrity. And on here, you're going to see a bunch of different pyramids from different views. But the first one I want to look at is this one, because it helps me determine where the height of the pyramid actually ends. And once I know that this is a cube, right, or this is in a square, if this is a base of a cubeoctahedron, then I can then calculate, transfer this information to a view that will give me the actual height of the pyramid, so I can draw it from a bunch of different ways. And basically what this view is showing is, it's showing you a cube in edge view like this. So this is the face view, edge view, vertex view, okay? And all those are on here. So this is edge view first, here's vertex view, and here's the face view of the cube over here. Now, if we're looking at it in the edge view of so the base of this hexagon over here, and as you can see, I put the drawing right over top of that. So there it is. You can see it matches perfectly. So there's the cubeoctahedron, that black shape. Those rhombus diamonds are actually the faces of the cubeoctahedron, and there's a square plane or a hexagon plane going through the form. And that's going to go ahead and go up towards the vertice of another cube out here. So we have a cube within a cube, okay, a red cube and the black cube here, all right? And they're both, this central edge is kind of shared by both, but one is smaller than the other, but it's not half the size. And it's not a random size either. It's 1/3 shorter, okay? So this base of it is basically in a cube that's 1/3 smaller than the large cube that the end vertice goes to. Okay, so that's the height of that pyramid. And here it is in your threefold, and here is the red cube. It's not black here, sorry, but with the purple cube, it's going from the same base as the flat base, which is the same base as the square base. Here's the red cube and the purple cube. Here is the same lines reaching out towards the vertice. This view here is interesting because it would literally be a cube like this, and if I tilt it this way, it would be like that, because that's what the cubeoctahedron is inside the form. It's basically showing you a cube like this. So that's an unusual view, diamond shape of the cube, but now we know that there's a cube that the base of this object, this structure is, the base of it is in a cube 1/3 smaller, the vertice ends at a cube 1/3 bigger, all right? So that's the height of that form. But basically why I'm going through all this is to really illustrate that this structure here is based on a hexagon base. And that is really, really counterintuitive to everything that I thought Keylontic science was based on. Was not related to hexagon geometry at all, was very much based on a square grid. So when I assumed and based on looking at the square view of it, that I was looking at an octahedron and cube, but really based on square, particularly of how much the literature of Keylontic science in the past has frowned upon hexagon geometry. But now I realize that their Merkaba is the star tetrahedron, and this height of this pyramid is going to be the one that is the doubling sequence pyramid, which I worked with. The one that they had would be a little bit shorter. But really what it comes down to is that we're really looking at what the base plane is and the importance of the base plane. And it was quite a shock to me to realize that the Keylontic science base plane is basically a hexagon structure, a hexagon plane looked at from a square view perspective. So, and it's not surprising because they utilize the light body. I guess the light body for them is a star tetrahedron, which I guess I then don't understand why there's so much negativity towards the hexagon-based geometry when it seems to be inherent to the system. Now, we're going to look a lot more at the octahedron view of this, but we're going to continue to make comparisons between the square-based and hexagon-based of these two forms. Here's a cubeoctahedron, hexagon view, and square plane. Because there is a square plane in the cubeoctahedron, and that is what this is showing you over here. We've got octahedron from vertex view, a cube from vertex view. Now, these two pyramids look the same, like from the side, completely the same. But really what the difference is here is this pyramid here, you see there's a blue and a red line. And that is basically creating two triangular pyramids put together like this, two tetrahedra, slid together. And what you get is a groove down the middle. And that's going to create this hexagon base in the middle, and then you'll have your cone on the inside of that shape, which is the same as this hexagon here. All right. Now, what you have on the right here for an octahedral base system is you have this pyramid, and if you flip it over, there's your cone based on 4 directions, 4 spirals on that one. And if we put it back this way, it's octahedron. Now the angles are the same here because the cone is the same inside both the forms. There's no difference besides the cone that's in the cone and the hexagon one and the square. The angle of the cone is the same and they end at the same spot. So ultimately, it doesn't really matter which. It's really what the container for the cone is for the doubling sequence. Now, I just want to illustrate one more thing here, is that the Kathara, this little shape over here that I showed before, the Kathara unit one here, that's not a doubling sequence cone that you're seeing here. If you put a cone in that shape, it'll be a different size. This one is based on the doubling sequence cone. Essentially, it's similar, it's related because it's coming off of this hexagon base, all right? So like I just said, both orientations contain the same doubling sequence cone, I should say, not here pyramids, because pyramid often is considered a square base usually, but we have hexagon pyramid there. But anyway, it's a doubling sequence cone that contains a spiral, which I'll show you some images of how that spiral works in a bit. So in terms of your light body architecture, it is a personal preference, I guess, for you, because the star tetrahedron view of the light body and the Merkaba is so popular of having a star tetrahedron. And essentially, this would be what the structure of it looks like, because the vertices of this would give you a cube. It's from this side view like this. So you're looking at the vertices facing up, but it's like this on edge view, okay? That's your cube on edge view. And here are the same spheres that are going to be within inside this one, but this is built on pyramids that are inside the same form. So this large form you're seeing here, this gold form with this rhombus in the middle, that's a rhombic dodecahedron. Okay, so that's this form here, and that's a compound of the cube and the octahedron. So, like I said, this is now your personal preference to look at this. Of course, we could look at icosahedral symmetry for your light body too, but let's just stick with this for now too. We've got a view that looks like this, right, with the cube-oriented vertice, or you have your octahedral vertice. Okay, and that's architectures of the two differences. Now, Keylontic science is based on this on the left. From what I could tell, they've set up the hexagon plane. They base it on a star tetrahedron. It's totally aligned with every other thing you see on star tetrahedron Merkaba out there. I have no idea why they made a big deal about separating themselves from that pack, because it's all the same geometry. It's really not different at all. And that hexagon-based structure that I'm showing you is the same. It's the same. It's a flat hexagon plane. You can view it that way. Now, you can also view that whole structure as a big rhombic dodecahedron, as I previously showed in my earlier videos way back here at the beginning. This is my previous interpretation of this structure. But now I realize, that this isn't even what they considered the light body to be at all. They considered still star tetrahedron. I thought they were being radically different and going with an octahedral based system for your light body, but they weren't. They're giving you the same thing that you get with the flower of life. So it was really weird to finally discover that after contemplating this for a while. But okay, but remember, it's your choice for how you want to relate to this sort of things and the architecture. If you're into, or what intuitively feels right to you, or if you're clairvoyant to see it and relate to it in that way, then you have your information given to you, provided through that lens. So these are the same cones, remember. It doesn't matter in that way, because that same cone is found in a tetrahedron and the square pyramid as well that I'm showing you based off of the base of that octahedron. So this is an octahedron-based light body. And if you've ever heard of the diamond body of light, that is very much what this is telling you. But if you're in a diamond body of light and you have a vertex that is a hexagon-based star tetrahedron, your diamond body of light is going this way. So as that goes around, your diamond body of light is, spinning around like this rather than having a vertice straight up. So anyway, I thought Keylontic science was aligned with this view, but it's not. But anyway, I'm going to go with this in a little bit and go with the octahedron-based model. But let's take a look at some more supporting evidence of how Keylontic science is looking at all this geometry and making cool designs from it, making these look more like, I see these as hoops, okay? Because the shading is showing me that that's kind of towards the front, and I'm assuming the dark is towards the back, and looking like another hoop here, another hoop here. And I'm working through looking at this cool thing that looks like, a very creative way of going about this. But if we bring it back to the regular oriented sacred geometry from square view, let's say, okay, from the twofold symmetry, I could easily turn that into showing all the geometric structures that are highlighting what is trying to be depicted here. Now, that hexagon base over here in this diagram would be tilted like this, and it would be ending kind of at this vertice, or actually be ending past the diagram here. But here's your square base. So I know there's a lot of information on the right here too. I've broken all this down to straight lines. And this big red square here, which has another red big square like this, well, that simply is just that's your cubeoctahedron, okay? That's just a big red square and a big red square. And inside this cubeoctahedron, on top of this, you see these big, smaller, there's 4 of these circles or ovals. Okay, those 4 that are in, those are basically a truncated octahedron, okay? And that's just being shown inside a cubeoctahedron. Now, those would be those ovals on the faces of this, and you can see where they're gonna leave a vacancy in the middle. Well, that's a square in the center of that, and that's your cubeoctahedron and truncated octahedron. As we go more interior, there's these rhombuses here that I put that are basically showing there's some sort of cone coming through the center here, which can easily be depicting this cone over here that I showed earlier in this slide here. See? This is that same cone. All I have to do is just rotate this whole image. I'm not going to do it. You're just rotating the form to the side. That's your hexagon circle, circle. There's another little one in the middle. Now, the proportions, I think, of the little cone that was drawn there is probably a little bit different, but it's still generally the same idea. As we get further into here, we've got some more of these hoops crisscrossing. And basically, we have another cubeoctahedron being shown in the middle here. And then right at the heart of this, we've got octahedron being shown at the smallest point. Well, that would be this. So basically, it's trying to make a kind of almost like you're tilting all the things so you can kind of see them not as straight lines to see that there are these hoops going around. And if you have a hoop going this way and this way, well, you have outlining an octahedron, and then you have cube. This is basically 1, 2, 3, 4. You'd have a 5th and a 6th face for this thing. So some information is being provided, some is being left out. But that's how I interpret that drawing. And it looks 3-dimensional to me, the way the shading looks on that. But basically what that's saying is that, yeah, all these are hexagons. See, this is the Kathara grid. That's the Kathara unit right there, this shape in the bottom right. That's one big Kathara unit. This big shape right here, that's a Kathara unit, the red outline. Well, that's what this shape is. It's showing you the outline. If you tilt it like this, having a white edge in the front shaded to the back, that looks like a hoop. And that's a hexagon hoop in a cubeoctahedron. These are hexagon hoops, following a hexagon hoop in a truncated octahedron. It's total regular old sacred geometry, okay? Clearly based on it. And this is called the shield dynamics of the Ekaveka body. Okay, so I wanted to show you some of the recent studies I had with the doubling sequence cone, just because I've been mentioning it a lot. But if you haven't previously seen those videos and kind of how I came up with some of these diagrams, was basically looking at that truncated octahedron, right? And remember, this is the same truncated octahedron shape that I just showed you previously here. These are these ovals. This is the same truncated octahedron. That's it right over here. And I was interested in trying to figure out how a spiral that looks flat on this image up here actually moves through space towards the center point of a form. And this cone, 70.528, made itself apparent, which is also the inner cone of the tetrahedron as well. So you could find it on the hexagon face as well as the square face of the forms. So when I trace this out, and I'm only showing you with the 90-degree turn spiral at this point, not with the 135-degree angles, you'll notice that all these gold lines are just connecting to the points, showing you where the spiral is entering the face of this opening right here and going in towards the center. And this is kind of the funnel that it works its way as it spirals towards the center. Now, if I rotate this whole form on its axes and just rotate it like this to an edge view of it, then what I have is the same two cones, the same cone here facing down, and I'm just showing you a different view of how the spiral moves through there, and this one is going through all that geometry. So that's all. That's why I really assumed that the crystal spiral, as I work my way around the image, was going to be related to an octahedral view, top-down view of an octahedron, because as I rotate it around, if you want the spiral to follow 8 points or 4 points around, making the 135-degree turns or 45 degrees every other segment. Well, then if you're looking down at the top, you're not looking at a hexagon, you're looking down at squares within squares within squares. And those are going to be either cubes or octahedrons, and truncated octahedrons, whatever you want them to be, but it's a top-down orientation, not from the hexagon perspective following the cone over here. So I feel like that's a very confusing element of the Keylontic science, of how it's tracing the outline of a spiral amongst these walls of squares, but ultimately the Kathara unit appearing to be actual hexagon in its orientation, which means that the spiral can follow a hexagon outline. In a previous video, I showed the angles of the hexagon as they work around. Oh, this is the pentagon-based one. I don't know where the little, where is the little hexagon one? Not sure. Okay, so although I now realize it's that the octahedron-based geometry is not the Keylontic science perspective based on what the manuals tell. Now, I know there's some other people out there in the Keylontic community who feel that the octahedron is the predominant version of the light body, but it doesn't seem to be the original teachings based on the traditional Merkaba of two interpenetrated tetrahedra. But because I went down such a road with the octahedron-based light body, which is still accepted by many healers and that look at it based on this symmetry. So let's go take a look at the 75-8 doubling sequence pyramid in these structures and how it can be centered on the body. You'll see some imagery that you have spirals associated with this container in the heart. You could have the body, of course, be a much larger being, and you could fill up the whole space. Whatever you want to do, you could center it any way you want, I guess. But I'll show you why I chose the heart image for these in just a moment. Let me, okay, so just so we know what we're looking at here, we've got the edge view of the octahedron and the vertex view of the octahedron. Now, we're going to discuss this a little bit further on, but we're going to talk about the symmetry associated with these different views towards the end. But of course, this line right here would be bilateral symmetry. You have a left and a right. This would be cutting through, a kind of transverse cut through here. And of course, this plane would be flat, going a coronal view, okay? We have a sagittal, coronal cuts through the planes of the human body there. This would shift those to be kind of at 45-degree angles from the base. So these would be still squares, but they're tilted squares. So this is just to understand. And these are fun to look at because when you stack the actual pyramids with inside these key stopping points, that's what is going on here. This is what these lines are about, these gold lines. So this right here is the top of the truncated octahedron. That meets right at the center. So that's the spiral of that cone. This one, if the same cone here will meet below, that will meet from, that's the cubeoctahedron base square. And that goes down to the base of another cube, the lower cubeoctahedron of the same form. And then if I take one off of the midpoint, or not the middle of the truncated octahedron on the hexagon face and send that down, well, that goes down to the base of the octahedron. And if you reverse all those, you get the same thing pointing up, and that's what it looks like tilted to the side. Here's a little kind of a little fun Sri Yantra design. Of course, you're not going to get perfectly crisscrossing lines there, but I was just having fun because when I first drew these, I was like, wow, that certainly looks Sri Yantra-like to me, of stacked pyramids. All right, so we have this popular crystal spiral imagery on the right that I pulled off the web, and I've overlaid the drawing that I just showed you previously. You could see it. I'm just pulling it away, and I've kind of shaded it a little bit. So that overlay is just showing you the square within square. Here it is again on the bottom. And here I've shown you, I've centered the diagram of the squares within squares that they show here. And I've always, when I first saw this image, I always considered that to be an octahedral based system, not a hexagon base. So we're still working with the octahedron light body description here that I'm laying out. And what I wanted to show was now what the spiral looks like here, and what this image of the crystal spiral is showing. If you don't picture this as a 2D image, but you want to see it kind of either entering or projecting out, radiating out of the body, and what that spiral will look like as it kind of follows the inside curvature of the this octagon-based pyramid here, okay? So that octagon base would be following the square and square and square and square structure of how the crystal spiral follows those squares around. And now that means that these segments and all the increments that it's progressing at are all going to follow the same progression that you see here on this crystal spiral on the flat view. So if you this is all up to you how you want to perceive this, but I do know that this spiral follows this curvature and follows the important part of the mathematics of what this curvature on the flat ground is telling you. So you could picture this spiral as either just going through you like on a flat plane, and I used to do that in my early videos. My recent attempt to make it a three-dimensional spiral greatly enhances my understanding of how it relates to the other structural geometry. Because remember, this cone now that I'm showing you isn't just a cone arbitrarily depicted. It's fitting inside actual geometric structure, right? And now, of course, this drawing right here is based on a hexagon base view of this. It's just showing you, so it gives you a little bit more of a three-dimensional perspective. All right, so you could view this spiral as kind of just cutting through your body along that plane, the coronal plane. Totally cool. Or you could project it, you could see it as a cone radiating out or receiving energy back in. Okay, so I had a little fun here and just kind of went all out with that image, and I made the cone flat at the base here. And you could picture the 6 directions here, and you could make these cones a lot smaller, and you could center them on any of your chakras. And what you'll have is a funnel system going top down, bottom up, meeting in the center point, left and right. And as you can see, I moved the octagon to the center of our drawing here, because that would be the one directly fitting in that central square, but the funnel coming in. Now, if all of these were a lot smaller and depicted down the length of the body or above the head, all contained within larger and larger and smaller structures, all integrated and linked. Because remember, this cone, because it's part of actual geometry based on this truncated octahedron and cubeoctahedron and octahedron, that means when you link these together, cubeoctahedrons, what you're doing is you're actually linking together the containers that hold this cone of doubling sequence cone. This was an early image, just led me in the right direction to turn it 3D, but this was just showing the flat kind of spiral as it went in. And now here are the spirals coming from those 6 directions. Now you see a lot of energy books. I'm thinking of Hands of Light by Barbara Brenner, old book. And even some of the Keylontic science imagery shows you cones centered going out from a center in the body, from the front and back and top and bottom of these vortices, these wheels, the chakra wheels, right? The chakra wheels, they are, following this type of symmetry. Now, left and right, you could have them radiating out those directions. So you've got these planes in the body with this octahedral system. Now, that's very, very different in a hexagonal-based layout. So just some things to consider. Now, let's see. Okay, I'm at this slide here. The hexagon view has its own 12 tree. All right, well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So just so you know, we really worked over the cone here. We're looking at that light body. Now I want to just get back to kind of the actual structural geometry and get back to the kind of 2 ways to depict the cube and the octahedron. Now, here's this same Kathara unit, right? And I've been showing that this is a hexagon plane, right? Now, it can also be part of a square plane. And that's really the tricky part about this, is that I think that this is the confusing part, because there's a square plane in here that's based on the octahedron. And if you cut a line across it and put a square within a square, that's how I've been viewing it, then that's what that line is depicting. That's depicting a square within a square, just like this. There's a big square, the gray, and then here's the Kathara unit, right? But if you go all the way up and down like this, then you have another square. Now, if you tilt that into a hexagon view, what is 2 equilateral triangles is a square. And this is so obvious because here's a big cube. These are 2 equilateral triangles. Right here on this cube in the lower right, if I draw a line straight through the middle, that's √3 through the middle. So these are 2 equilateral triangles. And if I go ahead and just tilt this to flat, well, it's this diamond shape. Now, what happens is when the Kathara unit, basically, if you base that Kathara unit on the 45-degree tilt, then it's showing you that's a hexagon. If you base it flat across like that, then it's really showing you, oh, it's part of a square like this. But if you can also view it as inside a cube, right? So if I go ahead and if I use the whole thing and I put it inside a cubeoctahedron like this, then that will be within this shape, which is a hexagon rod, a hexagon prism with this hexagon plane within inside it. Now over here, here's the same outline, same shape, but now I've extended those dotted lines back, right? And that becomes a square plane. And now I have a kind of square pyramid, a square kind of, so here's like a hexagon pyramid, elongated pyramid, and here is a square version of that. And this is an octahedron on the left and a cube on the right. If you put those 2 together, they're going to compound back into the rhombic dodecahedron, which I showed you previously. So the geometry is a little confusing because it can be multiple things at once. And you have to know what you're looking at to kind of base the structural geometry of how you relate to it. You have to know which choice you're making to look at the image, right? So here's the rhombic dodecahedron. This would be the cube vertice. This would be octahedron vertice. So if you rotate that form to face you from the side and you hold it to the cube, what you're going to get is this view. If you keep it to the octahedron vertice, you get this. So let me illustrate that. Here I have this rhombic dodecahedron. It looks like a cube almost from the top. It's a rhombic dodecahedron with rhombic faces. Now, if I start to rotate it and I end up on that rhombus, then what I've done is I've set it up so that it's oriented on the octahedron. But if I keep rotating it around, I'll end up and stop over on the vertices of the cube. They're in the same plane, and you can stop at either place. All right, so I know that's a little tricky to understand, probably, and I don't know if I did a great job explaining it there, but it's part of the a part of what I've been puzzling over, really, is flip-flopping back and forth that the same cubeoctahedron can contain what either looks like a hexagon plane or a cube plane right at the same spot. And I think that the Kathara Grid, or the Kathara unit, or Keylontic science, they went with this approach of the hexagon still. And all the other information I showed you illustrates that. Where this over here shows you that the octahedron can be the same shape, it's really just a square within a square. And all right, that's the best I think I could do in trying to describe that. But I'll continue on. Maybe some of these things will illustrate it. So we're just going to look at this core found in the octahedron. And if you look at this core, here is the square plane. And so if that's a square plane, and these rhombic diamonds now are square planes, when I tilt this form and flip it upright, here it is. This is the form. If we tilt it like this, this is what you're looking at it in that kind of image. You tilt it like this, and then you turn it to the side. It's just two stacked cubes with the pyramid top on the bottom, top and bottom. And all that plane's going to do is just go from tilted like this to going completely flat. And then all you're doing is turning the form from this to this, and that shows you two stacked cubes. So this is the hexagon grid contains a 12-tree actual 3D structure that can be perceived as two cubes stacked with the little pyramids on the top and the bottom. And those pyramids, of course, contain angles and proportions that are going to relate to all the doubling sequence cones that I've been sharing about internally. All right, so that's pretty interesting, because basically the 12-tree that was the Kathara Grid unit, in my view now, after really assessing this thoroughly, became a flat plane. You can turn the whole thing and perceive it like I previously did as a rhombic dodecahedron. That's totally fine too. It all works. But as perceived as a flat plane and slid into this 12-tree structure, turn it upright, that all is going to fit in an octahedron, but it's a central core of an octahedron, and it's two cubes, this spot here and this spot here. Well, that's just going to all be related to the internal structure of the cubeoctahedron. So this made me look at a little bit more the traditional Kabbalistic tree of life. And a while ago, I was trying to discover, well, what's up with this shape? Because I'm always going back trying to understand more of the geometry. And now that I looked at it kind of through this lens, what I discovered when I discovered that the pyramid, this doubling sequence pyramid, if it's tilted just right in a form, it will look just like an equilateral triangle. And I illustrated this in my previous video, Metatron's cube meets the Krystal Spiral. And I showed that Metatron's cube can be completely made of these pyramids, the design. And if you, basically this triangle here is the bottom half of a long pyramid. okay? And this is what that pyramid looks like. But if I tilt it just right in the tree of life, then the octahedron, so this triangle up here is an octahedron, and here it is from the octahedron from the side. There's the square view of the octahedron. But if I tilt it in a hexagon view, then what I come up with is top of piece of an octahedron, bottom long piece of a long pyramid. And then, of course, I could draw all the lines on the surface of these faces and tilt the form and show you something completely different. And some of these will be internally structural, because this would be crossing within the cube octahedron. This would be crossing, within the octahedron. Those would be the kind of crossing internal planes. This would be crossing internally on the base of this pyramid here. So all these lines actually mean something in this form. But when you rotate it, it comes up to be a long pyramid, this rectangle in the middle, and the rest of the octahedron on top. I know it's a totally different way to interpret that and look at this, but it completely makes sense in the internal structures of all the forms. But it really felt like it was missing a lot of information, because basically what you'd like to do, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just finish off the whole thing at the base and really just contain the whole structure in one unit to show that there's an octahedron at the base too. But for whatever reason, you have this equilateral triangle and this top kind of flares out. And this is the shape that the Keylontic science Kathara unit is saying this is a 10 tree of life, leaving out key important points, which, I tend to kind of agree, because it's missing some of the information if I look at it through this lens, which I know can be there, but it does illustrate two different pyramids that are all interlocked and related, really, octahedron and this doubling sequence pyramid, and easy to draw on the seed of life. Now, you could rotate that whole thing around, you'll come up with Metatron's octahedron, basically, because all this will come up to be an octahedron. But it did get me thinking about the tree of life more. And in my early videos from years ago, I shared a little bit on the Yggdrasil, the Norse tree of life. Yggdrasil, pronounced Yggdrasil. And the 9 worlds that are within the Norse mythology. And they have a lot of hexagon-based geometry. Their whole rune system is based on the hexagon shapes. And the tree of life, this geometric representation I saw of it, totally overlaid. 100% drew this seed of life version of the octahedron in the middle. I just don't have the side connecting bars around this, but we have basically a north and a south, east and a west, going through a midpoint, right? Then we have a point above it and a point below it. Well, that's an octahedron if I connect the lines. So it's gonna make equilateral triangle face. So there you go. You have 6 points already given. You have 4 directions already given, and then you have 2 additional points. One at the very top, of course, the Asgard, the place of the gods, and then you got hell down at the bottom, right? But that's essentially two pyramids of this doubling sequence pyramid with an octahedron in the middle. It's essentially all that geometry that I've been sharing about the doubling sequence pyramid is in these 2 stacked pyramids, just one on top of the other, right? I have 2 different sized pyramids here, but we've got one on top of the other, and an octahedron in the middle, and all that geometry makes total sense. Once again, in the Metatron's cube video, if you spun this around, Metatron's cube meets the Krystal Spiral, that is going to show you this doubling sequence pyramid, and it's this view with the central plane through the Earth here, right? North, south, east, west, basic view of many cultures of the directional model laid out here with the plane in the middle. So a lot of this was how to discover the plane that's at the middle of a sphere, and that square-based plane or a hexagon-based plane at the center. Okay, so here is the Yggdrasil in the cubeoctahedron here, and I'm showing you, I've overlaid a few drawings on top. Here's that cubeoctahedron. Here is your 12-tree Kathara grid in the hexagon view. Remember, all you have to do is rotate it to show it from the other view, and all that geometry will switch. But here is the Yggdrasil. The top point of this and the bottom point, they're both going to meet on the square plane, even though this looks like it's touching the triangle vertice. They're both going to meet on the square face of above and below, because basically that's two large pyramids. Here would be the blue one and a red one, interpenetrating each other from the cubeoctahedron. And as they go through the middle plane, from above and below, they create this pyramid of the Yggdrasil in the middle through the planes. And of course, we're focusing not on the hexagon plane here, because remember, you could view it that way. What we're actually focused on is the square plane here. All right, so this needs some additional lines, and I'll just draw them in here roughly right now, just to illustrate how the square plane is meant to be shown here. Something like that. That's going to go all the way through. Just kind of roughly doing it here. And you get the idea. That will create the square plane as I go along. And there we go. Bring that one down just a little bit. You don't need to see me do all that little adjustments, but there's the square plane through the center of the form. And it's basically what that's showing you is that's that square plane in the cubeoctahedron. The pyramid would be coming down, pyramid would be going up, and meeting in the middle, and there's your flat plane. That's the plane that the Yggdrasil is based on, showing you that it's a square base plane on the inner form, because you have a north, south, east, and west. So a little information from a traditional view of the tree of life in relationship to the Kabbalistic tree of life. All right, so if you're looking for a tree of life, we have a lot of possibilities and a few different views to look at here. And I was kind of looking at the largest rhombic dodecahedron here on the left, and basically what I did here was I kept making smaller and smaller rhombic forms by basically keeping the upper and lower vertices the same and creating midpoints on each of the faces, and then extracting a form that would be built on the midpoints, and then this would be built on the midpoints of this, and this would be built on the midpoints of that, and this would be built on the midpoints of that, all the way along. Except the only thing I'm doing here is keeping an upper and lower vertice to see what happens with the pyramid structures that go through the form. And what I was discovered there is that this shape here, the one in the middle of the 5 that I'm showing in each row, of course, these are all the same views. This is from a hexagon view. This is tilted to, rotated to a square view. This is a face view, the rectangle view, all the same form, all the same dimensions, shapes, proportions. One is just rotated left and right, so you could see different edge proportions and angles that will show up. But over here on the right, this one is going to kind of combine both the Yggdrasil and Kabbalistic tree, but what it did is it extended the lower and upper lines, as you see here, to not have it just bottom out at that triangle like the other tree of life did, the Kabbalistic tree of life, and it extends it up here. So it's a kind of a different shape altogether, but it has the double pyramid meeting in the middle of this form. And that form looks like this here. And here it is from a few different views, and contains the pyramid, the doubling sequence pyramid in it, also facing up and once again facing back down. And that's what these lines are going to be indicating on these structures. Believe it or not, this looks like it's got a lot of lines on it, and that's the hexagon view of the same form. And that's all that happens when you tilt these from having flat planes going across, 1, 2, 3, like that. Once you tilt it, basically you see all the structural information that is contained on each of these faces that are just being held flat to you here in the drawing. But essentially they each have a octahedron at the heart of all of these, another larger octahedron here, and it has this double stacked cube. So 2 cubes stacked. So when it does come down to it, what you do have still in there is this kind of central core double cube structure that I showed before, except I made it into a rhombic type of structure that looks more like this. And of course, with this rhombic faces, you can put these together infinitely and fill all space. It's just a slightly smaller version of the rhombic dodecahedron, but it is filled with mathematical proportions that are full of wonder and amazement. And that's why I really like this stopping point of my my rhombic dodecahedron workout, basically, because if you don't eat enough and you work out too much, you're going to get too thin. But if you don't do that at all, you're going to get too big. And if you're somewhere in the middle, maybe that's a good point to be, right? Somewhere oscillating around here. I don't know if that analogy works, but it came to mind there briefly. So if we've got basically the structure is a very cool one in that the geometry, that sacred proportions here are all laid out in some of the most classic diagrams, especially this one in here, 2 stacked cubes. Because remember, at the central core of this is 2 stacked cubes or 2 stacked squares. And if all we do is to realize that it's 2 cubes is tilt it, and then we have root 3 show up, right? And that's what this is here, root 3. Now, of course, root 3 is going to be in each of those cubes. So we have those. But because the pyramid is in there, and that's extending out over here, well, that pyramid here is based on the length, the edge length. If this rhombic face is 1, unit 1, well, the pyramid edge length is root 5. There's the pyramid edge length. Here's the base is 2, height is 2, square root of 2, 2. I mean, the edge length of this is the square root of 6 divided by 2. And all the information that you need to build this form, all the sacred proportions are all laid out here. And I don't have slides of it laid out in this presentation, but I'll do it more in the next, because we're going to study this pyramid in greater detail, is all related to the golden proportion stacked circles within here as well. But that's because it's based on the square root of 5, which of course is related to the golden proportion. So you got everything going on in here. You've got 1, 2, square root of 2, square root of 3, square root of 5, square root of 6, the square root of 18 divided by 2. So that's how a sacred structure is embodied, right? It maintains these proportions within the structure because it's integral to the structural geometry of the containers and the forms that it's based on. And even though it's kind of a shard of a larger octahedral cubic system that we've been looking at, we know that those contain sacred proportions within them. So they're going to transfer at the smaller, narrower level here. And so much of this study that I've been involved in recently comes back to this doubling sequence pyramid of the 70.528. And of course, as I mentioned, that fits, there's 2 of those inside, or there's many of them actually, but there's this pyramid right here. Is this pyramid tilted in this hexagon? If we turn it flat, so this base now is flat, you'll see that this is what the spiral is doing as it goes up, following the Krystal Spiral doubling sequence pattern, which is from the side, from the top view here. So if I'm looking straight down at this pyramid, this is what I'm going to see as the proportions are maintained following the doubling sequence going up. And that's kind of, this view gives you a little bit of both, whereas this doesn't give you the top down, just gives you a side view. This one gives you, the hexagon view is kind of cool that way because it gives you both a bit of both. Gives you a kind of, gives you a slice of what it looks like to be top down and from the side. And of course, that's within this structure that I'm showing you here, my little new tree of life. And of course, this is what it looks like here, and I've shown you in the other drawings too. But this is the big piece, I think, of this whole thing, is that Kathara Grid unit, and maybe if you're very much into Kathara Grid and into the Keylontic science, go ahead into the manuals there. And if you do like the star-based tetrahedron system, then don't be viewing this as this octahedron base square, like within a square. I guess you view it more as a hexagon, still all on the same cube octahedron. It's still going to be in there because remember, the cube octahedron contains both the square base and the hexagon base. But I guess you have to know what you're looking at for a flat plane of how that's going to transfer over to how it's going to reorient what vertice you're positioning your light body around, as I said before, either octahedral vertice or the cube-based vertice. Oh, but maybe why not both? You know, that would be interesting. But let's just get down to this one last slide here, because I was really deep in contemplation about this and how to present this material. So I don't want to sound one-sided with this, because I'm really trying to grasp, well, what does this really mean? You know, like, what does it matter what the base structure is? I mean, we have a lot of hexagon-based structures out there. A lot of things show up as hexagons. But what does it mean for the human body, for our own energetic system? And because I've studied so much biology in the past as well, being a conservation biologist, it really became kind of almost apparent that when you divide any animal body that maintains symmetry of these planes, the sagittal plane, the kind of transverse plane here, and the coronal plane. Now, I found a definition that called that spherical symmetry last night. But for the most part, it's called bilateral symmetry, which is what we are constructed like, bilaterally symmetrical, right? You have a plane going through your midpoints, transverse, coronally, and sagittal. That is an octahedron-based structure. That is also found in the cube octahedron, okay? Now, that is a cube octahedron. All you have to do is connect the vertices, and you'll have a square face here, just like this one above it. And you'll have 3 planes interpenetrating itself that are squares. And if you connect, you'll have 8 triangles and 6 squares. And that is what this is. That's an octahedron, right? There's a diamond body outline. That's the plane in the middle. Now, radial symmetrical organisms can be divided into specular halves by a number of planes, sagittal, coronal, possibly others, pass through the dorsal ventral axis. So these are all going to be flattened critters. They're going to be starfish, basically. And this is a hexamerism, 6-parted. And I think it became apparent to me as I was studying these 2 forms that I built years ago. I'm glad I had them because I didn't have to build them again, but here they are. You know, I was looking at these 2 forms and I was based on the hexagon plane and the square plane. I realized they both carry the same vertices, and they both are going to contain the possibility of having the cones either in the triangular face as well as the square face. That's the doubling sequence cones. And this one is just half the size in square here. And that's in this cubeoctahedron structure here, showing some of the potential cone faces, interfaces. Now, you just have to do this, like this is your personal preference, your own experience. When you are looking at your internal anatomy, and here's this rotated to a hexagon orientation, right? So this would be as if you are in a hexagon oriented plane. Now, picture this as top up, right? Here's your head up here. Here's your feet down here. That means you're radial symmetrical, which means you're like there's no bilateral symmetry in this, the way you're designed. So that's really confusing. And this is actually the way that the Keylontic manual is showing you this, really, is like it's going with the traditional star tetrahedron view, that you have this Kathara unit to the side like this, pointing out to vertices of cubes to keep your in a star tetrahedron, which I mean is fine. A lot of people love that. But when you actually look at the planes in the body as they go through a human body, I find it personally very disorienting to look at it in this kind of context. Now, I may sound a little biased there, but when I place myself in my mind's eye energetically in a plane system like this, it's very easy for me to orient where my directions are, just simply like that, in any place in my body. If I try to do this orientation of the planes like this through this hexagon base with the hexagon base, I just find it very disorienting. But I'll leave that all for you, up to you to decide. Like I said, if you're into the Krystal Spiral and the doubling sequence cone, this one will be based on 4, this will be based on 3 kind of main meeting points, or 6 or 8 or 4 over here. But I think there's some confusion with the Keylontic science manual based on what their diagrams are showing, but or how they're using square view and what looks like an octahedron based system, but actually are still involved very much with the hexagon based geometry. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all, but it seems entirely out of alignment with everything else they've shared about hexagon based geometry. Because I really thought they were talking more about something like a square based pattern, but from what I could tell from what I showed earlier on, especially with diagrams like this, and basing what I could read in the manual, what basically is showing you the Merkaba based system that it's built on, just basically saying there's two Merkabas, is still orientation is in a star tetrahedron, which is totally fine with those teachings, but I don't think many people, I don't think some of the popular versions of the way you see it, I think is not depicting it the way that it may actually be presented, because everything about this diagram is showing me something completely different about what this is based on, being based on the octahedron based symmetry. All right, so that's a little bit of an overview, a little bit of a ramble, but that's what I can make sense of the recent studies of looking at the 12 tree of life and really getting down to the plane. And of course, if you look at it in this context, this will all still fit in exactly the way I shared, everything based on the octahedral based system as well, because this has the cube flat and basically stacking 2 cubes if you wanted to. It's just going to make more and more octahedron. And yes, if you still tilt it, it will make a hexagon. It's just the way it works. The thing I really refined, I guess, is that I figured out much more about how these spirals really interact to the new cone, the 70.528 cone, 70.528 cone, following the doubling sequence geometry. And that's a bigger refinement here. But there's nothing wrong with the earlier videos that I've been sharing, in my opinion, of conflicting with what I've recently shared I just think they're in greater, they don't actually match up with the way I thought they did about Kathara-based grid units. Now that I think it's actually what they're showing is a hexagon. So that's the summary. All right, well, I really appreciate you going on that journey with me. I hope that it was interesting. I'd say if you're into the Keylontic science, go ahead and take a better look at the manual. Love to hear your questions and comments about it. And yeah, check out new geometry courses. I'll be doing a course pretty soon on Keylontic science. Well, Krystal Spiral, the geometry of it, really, right? In a very unbiased way, I present some sacred geometry techniques and tools so you could start to explore this material, because much of it is really you relating to the material in a hands-on way, and that's what is your teacher. You know, that's just as much as your teacher is reading all the things that are written there. That will instruct and guide you in what makes the most sense, and that's the beauty of what sacred geometry holds for you. So I'll be teaching a little something on that. And but a lot of other things there at New Geometry courses. Check that out, and please subscribe to the channel and go over to New Geometers Facebook group and join over there. All right, much love and appreciation. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.